Hey, it's me, the Quenchies. I'm that late afternoon craving you just can't shake. Wait, what's that? Welch's Grape Aid? No! Made with real fruit and no added sugar, nothing answers the call of the Quenchies like Grape Aid. Got the Quenchies? Grab a Grape Aid in your juice aisle.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. From the co-director of Shrek and the visionary behind Toy Story comes Spellbound, a magical new animated adventure starring Rachel Zegler, John Lithgow, Jennifer Lewis, Nathan Lane, and Titus Burgess with Javier Bardem and Nicole Kidman. When a powerful spell turns her parents into monsters, Princess Elian must journey into the wild to reverse the curse before it's too late. Watch Spellbound, only on Netflix November 22nd.
When I called up Congressman Jamie Raskin last week, I had a whole list of questions for him. He's a Democrat. He was in charge of Donald Trump's second impeachment. So you can imagine that right now this guy would have a lot to say. But I'd also heard that Raskin is a voracious reader, a fan of Shakespeare. So before we got into all that, I asked what book he had on his bedside table. This excited him.
Right now, I'm reading a really interesting book by H.W. Brands called The First Civil War, about how basically the country was split from the very beginning between those who were loyal to monarchy, autocracy, the merger of church and state, established religion, paranoia, superstition, dogma, and those who wanted to put government on a different basis, which is the consent of the governed, everybody being created equal, unalienable rights through life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness.
Sounds like you're preparing for things.
Yeah, well, in some sense, it's just never really ended. And, for most of human history, people have lived under kings and queens and monarchs and dictators. And not everybody believes that there's anything wrong with that. And not everybody believes that we can actually govern ourselves.
Representative Raskin has a lot of faith in Americans' ability to govern ourselves. Before he came to Congress, he was a constitutional scholar. It gives him this easy fluency with the levers of power in America. He's not shy about using those levers. His impeachment effort failed, of course, but he didn't stop there. In the primaries, he argued the 14th Amendment meant Trump should be kicked off the ballot because he engaged in insurrection. The Supreme Court disagreed. So Raskin took his argument to the American people. When he campaigned for Democrats around the country, he said this year would set the direction for American politics for the rest of the century and be the definitive American statement on authoritarianism. Well, here we are.
As an impeachment manager, you went on the floor and you quoted a Capitol police officer who sat despairing in the rotunda after January 6th. And he asked, "Is this America?" And you said that is the question of this impeachment trial. I wonder if you feel like this election has given you a kind of answer to that question.
Is this America? I was hoping back at the impeachment trial that would be an easy question for people to answer, that the senators who had just lived through the violence of the insurrection, who just lived through an attempted political coup, would say, no, we can demonstrate the legislative self-respect, the bicameral self-respect, the constitutional self-respect to say, no, we're not going to accept these kinds of violent assaults on the sovereignty of the people and the autonomy of Congress under the Constitution. I mean, the GOP punted, everybody punted, and then it came to the people. And in the election, I don't know that the people punted necessarily, but the half plus some that won basically said, for whatever reason, we understand that there was this assault on the Constitution and on the democracy, but it's not as important to us as some other things.
Today on the show, one Democrat grapples with what went wrong for his party and tries to chart a path forward. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance. They'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Planned Parenthood Federation of America exists so that all people can get access to the sexual and reproductive care and education they need to make informed decisions about their health. More than 2 million patients a year rely on the services Planned Parenthood health centers provide, like STI testing and treatment, birth control, gender-affirming care, abortion, cancer screenings, and so much more. Right now, all across the country, reproductive health care and rights are under attack from public officials who are out of step with the will of the vast majority of Americans. The constitutional right to abortion, control of our bodies, and the health care we need has been stolen from us. And now politicians in 47 states, yes, 47, have introduced bills that would block people from getting the sexual and reproductive care they need. Planned Parenthood knows that equitable access to health care, including safe, legal abortion, is a human right. Right now, Planned Parenthood needs your help to protect access to health care. Donate today by visiting PlannedParenthood.org/protect.
We're speaking on Thursday, November 14th. This interview will air a couple weeks after Donald Trump's reelection. And there are so many takes out there as to why Democrats lost. There are people like Bernie Sanders saying the party drifted too far away from the working class. There are people like David Plouffe putting the blame squarely in Biden's lap, saying he stayed in too long. I wonder where you lie.
Well, it's like this massive constellation of Rorschach tests. Like everybody.
Some people would call it a circular firing squad.
Well, that's the political implication of it. But the problem is that, everybody is seeing their little piece of the elephant, right? So, Joe Biden should not have waited so long. He should have gotten out earlier. No, Kamala Harris should have said in answer to that question that there are lots of things she would have done differently, or there are things she'll do differently now. Other people are saying we did not lean enough into abortion as an issue. Others say we leaned too much into abortion as an issue. And everybody's projection of a particular problem is a reflection of their own politics and what they want. I mean, all of these are historical, hypothetical counterfactuals. If we had done X, then we would have had a different result. If we'd done Y, we would have different results. So ultimately, it's all inscrutable and indeterminate. And it's far more a reflection, not illegitimately, but it is a reflection of what we want to do now and the way we think we should be moving forward.
How does all this inform what you do now in this in-between period before Donald Trump takes office to shore up the institutions of power that you think are important?
Yes, undoubtedly. I've been talking about a whole, laundry list of democratic reforms and structural changes that we should try to push. And, we'll have to see what plausibly can be done in, an 8-week period.
Is there one thing you want to do in particular?
There are things that I'm trying to push both legislatively and push with the administration. Legislatively, I've got bipartisan legislation called the Press Act, which is to protect reporters against compulsory process of their notes and having to produce their notes by subpoena. So it's basically to reinforce the freedom of the press so that reporters and the media are not going to be tyrannized during this period. It's bipartisan legislation I have with a colleague named Kevin Kiley, and we want to try to get it through the Senate before this is all over. It's very practical, but it could be really meaningful if we go into a tough period. You go back to the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. That was an attack on immigrants. It was an attack on the political opposition, and it was an attack on the press, all of them together. So we got to do whatever we can to insulate people.
I think in the past, our lack of collective imagination when it comes to Donald Trump has really benefited him. I thought about this recently because just the other day when Trump met with congressional leaders, he joked about potentially seeking a third term as president. And I feel like that's how a lot of ideas, wild ideas, enter the conversation when it comes to Donald Trump. I'm curious what you are imagining next and what you think my listeners should imagine, not to scare them, but to prepare them and maybe be practical.
Well, on that point, just to give people some comfort, in 2026, we are going to have a chance to take back the U.S. House and potentially the U.S. Senate, or maybe both. That gives us an organizing structure for thinking about how we get through, the next 24 months of our lives. Look, on the best days, I think we have to assume that take their rhetoric seriously. They want to create something like Orban's government.
Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Viktor Orban's government, a white Christian nationalist administration where the president sacks large parts of the government, replaces them with party and personal loyalists and flunkies and sycophants. And then one person basically runs the whole country like an autocrat in corrupt association with oligarchs, Putin style, who are able to make out like bandits with no legal scrutiny or legal regulatory supervision, right? And then they will govern on the basis of scapegoating and bashing minorities and so on.
That's scary.
It's scary, but look, I'm talking about this in a conversational tone of voice because I think we have to. This is for real, and there are lots of people who are scared. There are obviously millions of undocumented immigrants in the country and other kinds of immigrants who are scared about what's going on. There are lots of civil rights, civil liberties groups who are scared, and there are various people who've been identified as political enemies of Donald Trump who are just trying to prepare reasonably as they should for what might come. But we can't let the fear paralyze us. That's the key thing. We've got to act with a lot of courage. And we did it the first time around, and we've seen a lot of people acting with courage. And, one person's courage emboldens other people. And we've got to hang tough for the Constitution and for democracy.
You mentioned that you have this chance in 2 years. It's the midterms. You could flip the House. What do you think the Democratic Party needs to prove to voters in the next couple of years to make that happen, given the pretty devastating blow the party's just received?
Look, I know everybody in the press wants an answer to that. If we gave you an answer 5 minutes after the election, as everybody was asking for it, or 5 days after the election, it would be kind of meaningless because this is something that requires real study and real analysis.
You don't have a gut take here.
Well, I'll tell you this. I know that our turnout was down. Trump's was up a little bit, but ours was down significantly, down 10 or 11 million votes. Okay, those are people who, if they went to the polls, would be voting for us.
But you guys had a great turnout machine.
Well, to a certain extent, we did in conventional terms. But the thing about politics is it's a moving object, right? So, yeah, I went to 27 states. I was involved in dozens of canvass operations and rallies and so on. That's what felt to me psychologically like a great turnout machine. But maybe that's not what works today. Maybe social media and internet is far more important, or maybe we've been outdistanced in that respect. So we got to look at that. I don't know the answer to it. I do know that Democrats win when we've got economic progressive populism on our side, and we lose when we are the cultural elite admonishing the public about people's, language mistakes and stuff like that. Like, all that is obviously true.
Do you feel like you guys were really scolding people over their language, or that was a Republican talking point that got projected onto you?
Yes, the latter. There we go. That's what it was. So, but we got to analyze how we got maneuvered into that position, right? I'm just saying we need a cold, hard political science look as best as we can, knowing that politics is not exclusively a science, it's also an art. But we need a cold, hard look at what happened and where we need to make up ground pragmatically. I know there's a million people out there with an ideological axe to grind who want to say it was this, it was that. Look, hey, if you knew what the problem was all along. You should have told us before. You should have written your op-ed 4 months before the election, not 4 days after the election, right? So victory has 1,000 parents and defeat is always an orphan. But what it means to be a serious political actor is to, cheer people up as much as you can. Get up off of the ground, dust yourself off, and say, let's move forward and let's figure out, all of the different views we can incorporate to move forward and win the next election. What else can we do? Winning is the name of the game. And it's never been more serious than it is right now. We know that everything is on the table. Everything's at stake.
After the break, Donald Trump is already trying to bend the next Congress to his will. So who's going to stop him? This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
I'm talking to you at this moment in time when Donald Trump is releasing like one cabinet appointment after another. And I'm calling this a shock and awe tactic because I do feel like the volume of potential nominees and their sort of outside of the box backgrounds are meant to kind of overwhelm the senses of the general public and lawmakers like you. I don't know if you agree with that assessment. That's how I feel. Is there one proposed appointment or another that concerns you in particular and why?
Well, the Matt Gaetz nomination,
nominated for Attorney General,
is one that may be exploding that whole strategy you're talking about because it's created such a backlash, not just among Democrats, of course, but among a lot of Republicans. I mean, remember, Matt Gaetz is not a guy who plays nicely with other Republicans. He's campaigned against a number of our Republican colleagues who he sees as insufficiently MAGA, insufficiently pro-Trump, and he's taken them on. And he was centrally involved in the internecine warfare against Kevin McCarthy and made a lot of Republican enemies, at the same time. But he's also been under investigation for alleged sex trafficking, and members of Congress have openly spoken about how he's shared explicit photos on the floor. I'm curious, do you think Matt Gaetz could pass a background check? Well, if you ask Republican senators like Collins or Murkowski, no. I saw them on TV last night saying, basically implying that there's no way he could get by an FBI security clearance process.
Gaetz has also been under investigation by the Ethics Committee, and they were supposed to release a report shortly. There's some controversy over whether that's still possible. Do you think it is, and should it be released?
Well, there are different theories now about what's going on here. I mean, I think the dominant theory is that Trump wants Gaetz, who's been a real attack dog for him, to be his attorney general and wants to unleash him against, perceived political enemies that Trump has everywhere from, the government to the press to business community and so on. The other theory, though, is that Gaetz was facing a vote on releasing the ethics report about his alleged involvement in sex trafficking, women and underage women. And it was going to come out on Friday, theoretically. That's what most of my colleagues believe, that it was going to be released on Friday. And in order to save face, Matt Gaetz resigned from Congress yesterday. And since he's no longer a member, as a former member, the standard practice has been not to release an ethics report.
That sounds like a norm, not a law.
It's a norm. And the norm has basically been, look, if you just get out of here and let us, get through this.
Should we be following that norm?
I don't know the internal politics in the Republican conference on this particular point. But I was just going to make the point that some people believe that it was never a serious appointment to the Department of Justice, that the whole idea was to give him an excuse to resign from Congress, saying, oh, well, now I'm going to be Attorney General. I'm resigning from Congress, blocking the release of the ethics report, which could be a career terminator for him. And then, give it a few weeks of, being in the limelight and then say, well, these rhino Republicans in the Senate aren't going to let me in, so I'll go back to Congress in the 119th. Because remember, he just resigned from the 118th Congress, but he just won re-election to the next Congress, and we're going to be sworn in on January 3rd.
I mean, this is assuming some kind of four-dimensional chess, which I'm not sure we should. You could also see it, if we're speculating here, as a loyalty test for John Thune, the new leader of the Republicans in the Senate. Will you do this thing for me? Because there's also been discussion about will cabinet members be getting recess appointments? And now you are a former constitutional lawyer and professor. Can you walk me through how that would happen, not just for Matt Gaetz, but for some of the other controversial picks who are out there? Like, how would that work? Is it constitutional to appoint people without Senate approval?
First of all, the likelihood is that it's all these things. In other words, that Trump would probably love to have Matt Gaetz as his attorney general, even knowing how unlikely it is. And they decide, let's roll the dice and give it a whirl. At the same time, Matt Gaetz effectuates this at least temporary suppression of the ethics committee report. And they get a chance to see where it goes. But Trump has made it clear that he wants to try to use the possibility of recess appointments like this.
And how long do those appointments last?
They would last until the next session of Congress comes in. So they last.
So you think the Senate would allow an appointment like this to happen without their consent?
I think that John Thune is enough of what would pass for today as an institutionalist to say that this is an essential application of authority. But if they were to do it, I do think that the Roberts Court would go along with it, because what they said in the presidential immunity case was that if the president is engaged in something that's arguably within the core powers of the presidency, regardless of his motivation, that can not only not be used against him in a prosecution, it can't even be used as evidence in some other case.
So I think what you're saying is all eyes are on John Thune right now.
I think it's going to be up to him. I think he might be in a mood to flex some of his muscle, and he might say the whole reason I was elected was to reject capers and ploys like this, which are an attack on our fundamental powers as the U.S. Senate.
Or maybe not. Maybe not. It sounds like a lot of pressure on one guy.
It is definitely a test.
Representative Raskin, you've been very generous with your time. I'm grateful for it.
Thanks for having me.
Congressman Jamie Raskin represents Maryland's 8th district in the House of Representatives. And that's our show. Just a reminder that until Thanksgiving, we are teaming up with Slate Politics to bring you The Surge every Friday. It is a roundup of the week's biggest political news. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's a good place to check in and just hang out with me and Jim Newell, who is Slate's senior politics writer. Here's the catch, though. If you want to hear The Surge, you're going to have to join Slate Plus. That's okay, though, because it's our membership program, keeps the lights on over here at Slate. So you'll feel good when you do it. And it's also really easy to do. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of the What Next page, or you can visit slate.com/whatnextplus to get access wherever you listen. You'll get bonus content plus no ads on any podcasts like this one. It's pretty great. The Surge is available for one more week this Friday for you to listen to. After lunch, I will catch you there. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here next time.
Former President Donald Trump rewrote the rules of how the American justice system treats our nation's most powerful people. Hello, it's Andrea Bernstein. I'm the host of The Law According to Trump, a special series from Slate Plus. Long before the Supreme Court granted presidential immunity, Donald Trump created a blueprint for shielding himself from legal accountability on everything from taxes to fraud to discrimination. Listen as we explore Trump's history of bending the law to his will. Check out The Law According to Trump wherever you get your podcasts.